President Muhammadu Buhari on Friday presented a budget estimate of 20.51 trillion naira for 2023, the joint session of the Senate and the House of Representatives at the National Assembly. The budget, Christian budget of fiscal consolidation and transition, is designed to perhaps address critical issues and lay a solid foundation for the incoming administration. A breakdown of the proposed appropriation bill shows that the federal government has earmarked 744.11 billion naira for statutory transfers, 8.27 trillion naira for non-debt recurring costs, 1.1 trillion naira for overhead costs, and 5.35 trillion naira for capital expenditure, amongst others. Joining me live now to do analysis of this proposed budget, 2023 budget, and of course the impact on Nigerians and by extension the economy, is a research analyst at Chapel Hill Denham, Mr. Azeez Bakare. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us here on Business Nigeria at this time. Just before we get to some specifics and some numbers, I wonder if you perhaps follow the presentation by President Muhammadu Buhari of this budget, and I'm just perhaps curious to know what your initial thoughts and assessments are of this budget, 20.51 trillion naira.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, I did. I followed the presentation by President Muhammadu Buhari. So our view in-house is the budget is quite very optimistic. Just looking at the assumptions for the revenue and also looking at the expenditure leg. It's really quite very optimistic. So let me start with the expenditure. So 20.51 trillion naira. That's actually very significant, right? Though you know the budget is an incremental budget. So compared to 2022's budget, that's about 20% increase. However, when you dissect that number, you realize that a significant portion of the capital of the expenditure is recurrent non-debt and also debt service. So our view in us is that the 20.5 trillion naira actually be surpassed, just given the H1 implementation result that was also released last week. So we expect that most likely they will surpass that 20.5 trillion naira. So let me give you an instance. So for the debt service already, right, is around 6 trillion naira for 2023. But if you look at how Nigeria has actually borrowing recently, it has actually been aggressive, both most especially on the domestic front, right? And if you see for the debt service of 6 trillion naira, it's not even the revenue alone that we're going to generate or expected to generate is not even sufficient to cover that debt service on that part, and we still most likely borrow beyond what was stated in the budget. So just on that part is very unrealistic. When you look at it in terms of the recurrent non-debt, right? For the recurrent non-debt, you know, so items like the subsidy, for instance. So for 2023, within January to June 2023, because this projected to be around 3.3 trillion naira. If you actually estimate or analyze that number for the year, let's assume we're going to actually be in the subsidy for over January to December, that would be around 6 trillion naira. So that already shows that 20.5 trillion naira most likely surpass over 2023. When you look at it from the revenue leg, the federal government is heavily relying on oil revenue. So just to give you a bit of color to the oil revenue, some of the assumptions, you see that for oil production, it was pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day. But when you look at how Nigeria has actually been churning out oil production recently, it has actually been very discouraging. As the last week or last 2 weeks, we got a report from OPEC that Nigeria is barely producing up to 1 million barrels per day. To be specific, that's around 972,000 barrels per day, which is even below. So now just to overlay this to the budget for 2023, it shows that number is actually very bullish. Most likely we might not meet that quota. And from there we start to see shortfall on the revenue leg while the expenditure leg continues to expand. So that would lead to a huge deficit for the government to finance. So that's largely I'm taking for the 2023 project.
Yes, well, Mr. Bakare, of course, I mean, you've touched areas already. I was looking at asking some very specific questions, issues around budget deficit, and of course, the oil benchmark, which perhaps we should stay on for a moment, because in the budget it's been placed at $70 per barrel, but on our daily production, which of course is a major concern for many experts in the country, is the fact that it's been pegged at 1.69 or 68 million barrels per day, which you have highlighted. But of course, since we're unable to even produce up to 1 million barrels per day, I'm wondering, is this the new normal? Is that something that can be done to improve this aspect of our oil production, or is this just perhaps the reality on ground?
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, a lot can be done. So you know what led to this in the first place. So despite the OPEC quota, Nigeria was even producing below. So you would agree with me that just recently in the news, we've been getting stuff around lower oil production regarding maybe oil thefts and pipeline vandalism, right? So the combination of those factors most likely would continue because we haven't really seen significant progress on that front. Though we've been hearing that most likely they'll work hand in hand with the task force and all just to curb these oil thefts. But it has been getting worse as the day goes by. And just looking at how it has been, if you project it over 2023, and if you just looking at the H1 2022's budget implementation results, you see it's at 1.3 on the average between January to June. So let's even assume that amount over 2023 is still not sufficient to the level that we're expecting. So I think it's really unrealistic.
All right. So the other area, of course, that has to do with the budget deficit, which you have touched on earlier. And it's interesting because it does appear that we are going to be borrowing even the more perhaps in 2023. But just how concerned and how problematic is this, especially for the new administration in 2023?
Yeah, it's really quite alarming, right? I looked at the number, like, this is a lot. So at the moment, the budget deficit around 10.8 trillion naira for 2023. So in-house, we estimated it to be around 14.5 trillion naira, right? And just looking at how the government will fund these deficits, it's most likely going to be skewed towards the domestic side of things. You know what is going on externally when you want to raise a the rates are actually trading higher and higher. Then when you look at the exchange rates stability at the moment, that will cost Nigeria more, not to talk of the increase in the interest rate on that front. The US Fed has actually guided to increasing rates in a bit to taper inflationary pressures or concern, right? And what that implies is that rates will continue to trend upwards in that point. So that would actually not encourage Nigeria to actually go and borrow externally. So a lot of these borrowings most likely be done domestically, most likely in the capital market. We continue to see that heavy borrowings, and you know what that means for the fixed income asset class. Most likely you start to see interest rate trend upwards and upwards. And so that's really how.
Mr. Bakare, let me take you back to the issue around our oil production as a country, because I've just had to dig out something that played out last week or so, Wednesday, when OPEC Plus members, of course, including the 10 allies led by Russia, agreed last week, Wednesday, to lower their output target by 2 million barrels. I wonder, of course, just what the impacts would be for the Nigerian economy as well as our budget.
Okay, so I want to assume that. So this has happened before. This is not the first time this is happening to Nigeria. This has happened before, and I think the OPEC would be largely considerate. You know that they are aware of what is currently going on in Nigeria, and I think that most likely would not apply. We would actually be giving some waivers to actually fix our production issues based on historical precedents.
All right. So, of course, we have touched the fact that indeed this budget has been christened a budget of consolidation and transition. That's because we are set for a new administration in 2023. But in terms of implementation, for instance, how have we fared over the years? That's on the one hand. And then, of course, when this transition is made, how optimistic are you? How positive are you about what the new administration will be faced with in 2023?
Okay, thank you very much. So this is actually very pending, I would say, because we don't know the government that will be in power in 2023. And right now, we're hearing a lot of things from different political aspirants, right? And but what I can just largely say is that um, most likely the new government will want to continue what is currently on ground. Because just looking at it, regardless of the party that comes into power, just looking at it, if you were to be the president, what will you have to? So a lot of structural issues in Nigeria, I would just advise the government to focus more on capital expenditure, because when you are channeling most of your finances towards recurrent expenditures, is actually not helping the economy in a way. It's actually digging a very deep grave for the economy, in my opinion. So I would expect that more funds should be channeled towards capex, that's capital expenditure. In that way, that will help to stimulate the economy, generate more revenue. What we need to do is to actually improve our revenue generating capacity, and we need to actually channel our resources more from food oil to all other aspects that we can actually generate more funds. And again, that would also start to attract foreign portfolio investors back into the country, and that's actually what I feel and what I believe that the new administration should really focus on. But just looking at the historical precedents, I think they will just want to follow what's going on.
Well, of course, I mean, you've touched the fact that you've touched how essential capital expenditure is, and of course, the impact on Nigerians. In fact, it must be mentioned that it benefits the larger chunk of the masses in the country. However, the capital expenditure for this particular budget is even lower than what we saw or what we had in 2022. Just how problematic is this? What's the possible consequences and implications for Nigerians?
Like I mentioned earlier, this will actually discourage foreign portfolio participation. And secondly, you start to see a lot of slowdown in economic growth. So just in their proposed budget, the economy is projected to grow at 3.57%. That's to show you that show you how the government is thinking about Nigeria for 2023. I would have expected that probably invest more in this capex, and from there expect the economy to grow further than 3.57%. We're still a developing nation. We shouldn't be going at that particular rate. It's really below population growth. So I really largely think that the government should revisit the budget before 2023 comes.
I'm also anxious and curious, perhaps, to also know how this global event, the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine since February this year, just what kind of impacts that has made or is making on the budget. Because the difference between this budget and that of 2022 is about 16%. This is about 16% higher than what we had in 2022. So just how much of an impact has the COVID had on the economy and the budget size, and of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as we continue to see inflationary pressures all around the world?
Okay, yes. So just looking at, well, let me start with the COVID impact. So I'm very happy that Nigeria has been able to a large extent, recover. Like, this is the 7th consecutive month of growth since the COVID. So on that front, the economy has started to kick off and all. However, there are still some sectors, like we already mentioned, the oil sector is still suffering, although that's other components of factors that actually drove that too. But looking at the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, yeah, it's not a direct impact in Nigeria, right? However, we are highly import-dependent country. So the issue of between Russia and Ukraine has actually been affecting most countries, especially in the advanced economy. And in a way, that has actually trickled down to Nigeria. However, the inflationary concerns and inflationary pressures that we are facing in Nigeria is actually more a cost push inflation, more of Nigerian peculiar issues. So I think just looking ahead to 2023, most likely we still continue to see that inflationary pressures. However, it's not going to be due to the concerns of the Russia and Ukraine war that is actually ongoing. Just looking at what is going on in the northern part of Nigeria, that region actually accounts for a sizable portion of Nigerian food consumption. And now when the supply stabilizes, we start to see prices increase on that point. Then all other things in the pipeline, that is increasing electricity tariff, further increase in AMS price, most likely if that happens. So that will trickle down to higher inflation. And again, that brings me to what is the budget. So it's actually expected to be around 17.16% for 2023. And as in Chapel Hill, we expect over 20% for 2023. So those are really our thoughts.
All right, so I have to let you go, but perhaps you can respond to this question in 60 seconds or less. During Mr. President's presentation of the budget last week, he said his administration, the last 7.5 years, can be summarized in two essential statements: the focus on critical infrastructure and, of course, good governance. But let's stay with just number one, critical infrastructure. When you take a look at the drive of infrastructural projects in this particular administration the past 7 years, what's your assessment? And when you also look at the size of what that is or represented in the budget for 2023?
Okay, thank you. In my opinion, I think it's weak. It's very weak. Though there are actually plans in place, like the Infraco coming on board about 1 trillion naira for infrastructure. I think that will go a long way. At least that will be a good starting point for Nigeria. But at the moment, reviewing over the past 7.5 years, I think it's weak. Maybe.
That's a fine place to anchor our conversation. Azeez Bakare, thank you indeed for your time and analysis on the program. Research Analyst, thank you indeed for speaking with us here on Business Nigeria.
Thank you, too.